In this video, we're going to talk about importing OBJ files or meshes into ZBrush from other 3D programs. So OBJ is a standard 3D file format that's portable. It works between different applications. So most 3D applications can save out an OBJ file. So if you have a 3D model, perhaps that you've downloaded from the internet or that a client has supplied you or that you need to work on for a pipeline or project, you will typically load that in as an OBJ. We'll do that by going to the star primitive here in ZBrush. Now, you don't really have to load the star, but I like to load it because it's sort of a null object in ZBrush. It just has no transforms on it. There's no scaling. It's just a generic empty 3D object. Then go to Tool, Import, and then browse to the file that you want to import. So I'm going to be importing basemesh.obj, which is just a version of the NICZ model that comes pre-installed with ZBrush that's saved out as an OBJ file. Now you'll see an OBJ file doesn't have subdivision levels. Depending on whether or not the mesh has been smoothed, you could potentially reconstruct a subdivision level by clicking the Reconstruct Subdiv, but that will only work if your model has a polygon count that's evenly divisible by 4. So if we go into frame mode, you can see that there's no polygroups on here. It's just a collection of quad faces. It's 8,774 faces in total. Now, what I want to illustrate in this demo is how we can import an OBJ, which we've just done, and then how we can organize it using polygrouping. So what are polygroups? Polygroups are color-coded selections of faces that allow us to easily isolate portions of the same mesh. So there's only one subtool here, but let's say I wanted to isolate the head and select the head. So the quick and easy way, if I use a marquee like this and isolate the head, that's just Control, Shift, click and drag for a visibility marquee. Go to the Polygroup submenu and click Group Visible. You'll see those faces now have a polygroup. So if I Control, Shift, click on the body, I can hide the head. If I repeat that on the body, I can reverse what's visible. If I Control, Shift, click on the background, I can make everyone visible again. If I click Group Visible, I can write over that polygroup with a new polygroup, and now everything has been polygrouped. So what I like to do is use polygrouping to organize a model before I start working on it. For example, if I take the Move brush and try and open the mouth here, you'll notice that the Move brush grabs everything underneath that red circle. Now, it is possible to use the Move topological brush. If we go to B for brush, M for move, we have Move topological. And this is just the Move brush with brush, auto masking, topological turned on, and the range is set to 3. If I set this down to 0.5, you see that this will grab the points that are topologically close to one another. It's not going to grab this point because this point might be spatially close to this point. Topologically, you'd have to walk all the way along this edge loop to get to that point. Now, the problem with this is it's not very fast. You see that it sort of limits the range of the brush effect. And I like when I'm sculpting to be able to make broad gestural changes to the model. So I'll use polygroups to separate the lower jaw from the upper jaw. So let's take a look at how to do that. I will go to the Tool menu, go to Morph Target, and click Store Morph Target. Now, what Store Morph Target does is it stores a copy of the mesh in memory. So if I make a change to the model now, and then click Switch, I can switch back to the original version. So I have one copy of an altered mesh stored in memory. So I will delete that and then store it again. Now, I'm going to turn on X Symmetry, and I will smooth the mouth so it's open. I'll go to a side view, and I will select the B for brush, S for select lasso brush, and just click OK on that. And then I'm just going to lasso select the faces of the lower jaw here. I will Control, Shift, click and drag to invert that visibility, and I'll turn off perspective just to make sure that I'm not catching any extra faces here. And I'll hide any extraneous faces. I just want to get everything that goes up to the corner of the mouth there. Now, if we go around to the back, you see that we've actually hidden faces on the back. So I will Control, Shift, click and drag to invert that visibility and then hide these faces at the back. So there you see we've got the inner mouth and the lower jaw. So I will go to Polygroups, Group Visible. and then reveal all again. So now I have a polygroup for the lower jaw. I can easily Control-Shift-Click on it. I can mask the lower jaw, and then I can move the upper jaw independently of it, but we've lost the shape. Well, that's why we stored that morph target. If I go back to Tool, Morph Target, Switch, that will return the shape of the mesh. Now let's say I want to add something to that polygroup. I see that I've sort of missed one loop of edges here. I will go ahead and hide just this edge loop here. Let's zoom right in here and get this. There we go. And then I will just go to Polygroups, Group Visible, hide the blue polygroup, and then Group Visible. And there we go. Now we've got a separate polygroup for the lower jaw. So now, if I were to go back to my Beaver brush, S for select rectangle, Control-Shift-Click on the jaw, I can Control-Click on the background to mask it, Control-Shift-Click on the background to reveal all again, and then Control-Click on the background to invert my mask. Now I can very easily take my Move brush and move the lower jaw. I could use the Transpose gizmo. Let's say, for example, I took my transpose line, moved it here. I can open the jaw. It allows me to very easily manipulate this portion of the model independently of the rest. Now, I also like to organize the ears with polygrouping, and I'll do that the same way. I will just use a selection marquee to isolate the ear. Zoom in here, and I'm going to go back to my select lasso, and I'm going to hide these faces here. And because I've got X symmetry turned on, this is mirroring to the opposite side, so I'm getting the same selection on both sides. Now, if you're using the select lasso, you can Control-Shift-Click on an edge, and that will hide an edge loop, but you have to be careful that that edge loop is actually flowing around the ear. If it's not, then you're going to have a problem. Like you see here, these edge loops don't actually run around the ear. I could potentially hide these loops like this, and I could isolate the ear this way. So that isolates the front of the ear, and then I'd need to make sure that I hid my jaw polygroup. And then if I were to click Auto Group, that would give all of those a separate polygroup. And then I can just hide the ear. Now you have to be careful if you have the select lasso, because it will accidentally grab an edge. So I will change this back to the select rectangle, and I'll hide the ears. Invert that invert that visibility, Group Visible, invert visibility again, and hide the lower jaw and Group Visible. So now I've got the ears polygrouped separately from the lower jaw and the head. So that will very easily allow me to grab the ears and move those. I can mask the rest of the head if I don't want the brush to impact those faces. Now, a few really important things to keep in mind when you're working with imported meshes. When you export an OBJ from ZBrush, make sure you go to the Tool menu, go to the bottom, and there is an Import-Export section here. If I go to Export, you have the option to merge UV coordinates. Make sure this is turned on. If you don't do this, your UVs will export from ZBrush as individual shells for every face. That is, make sure to merge your UV coordinates. You want to make sure that your export subgroups is turned off. If you look at that, what that's actually going to do is that will export meshes as separate items. It'll split out your group assignments. So you want it to be unpressed so everything's exported as a single group. And also you want to make sure that you're exporting quads rather than tris. For import, you see that you have the option to merge as well, and here you have add to mesh, so that will add to your current mesh if it's turned on, but we can accomplish the same thing by simply collapsing or merging down in the subtool menu. These settings can be set under Preferences, Import, Export. So if we look in the Preferences menu, there's Import, Export here, and you have Export. Now you'll find that there's further options here. We can change our flipping and whether or not we import polygrouping. So We can also import material assignments as polygroups. So, for example, if you've set up materials on different groups of faces in Maya, you can then import this with this button turned on, and those material assignments will turn into polygroups in ZBrush. Now, the best way to determine what these values should be is to take an object, if you're going back and forth in Maya, export it from Maya, bring it into ZBrush, and just make sure that it exports back out of ZBrush in the same orientation. Sometimes you might find that it's flipped along the Y or the Z axis. If so, then you would want to turn these on. So on your import or on your export, whichever way it comes in incorrect. From here, you will simply start adding subdivision levels and sculpting. There is a benefit to storing a morph target when you first start sculpting. Now, we stored a morph target for our polygroups. I'll delete that and then store it again. Now, the reason for that is, if you look at this model, as we start sculpting, if I were to take the move brush and make some big changes, maybe take the clay tubes brush and do some sculpting here, and then step back down my subdivision level, you'll see that it changes the shape of level 1. Now, the reason that's important is if you are sculpting on an OBJ that's been given to you that is currently in an animation pipeline, that mesh may already be rigged, it may already be in texturing, it may already be in animation. So your displacement map will need to actually be generated to apply to the original shape of the mesh, not this one. So if you've stored a morph target, before you generate displacements, you can come back here and switch, and then the displacement that you generate will calculate between the original model shape, which you're going to be applying the displacement map to, and your highest resolution of sculpture. And from there, it's all just adding subdivision levels and sculpting, as we've already seen. I just wanted to take an opportunity to give you some very specific information about importing meshes, because you're going to find that as you continue working in ZBrush, a lot of times you're going to want to bring in models and you're going to work on imported meshes that you've perhaps downloaded from the internet, purchased, or been given by a client or a coworker. So it's very important to know how to work with these, especially how to organize them using polygroups to make it more efficient, to easily hide and show areas, mask out the ears, invert that mask, and be able to work on areas independently without impacting the areas around it. So we can put a nice pointed elf ear on there without having to worry about affecting the faces behind it. So I hope you've enjoyed this look at importing meshes, and I will see you in the next lesson. Thanks for watching.